I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence.
I need to talk about JK Rowling and the fact that she is in fact transphobic.
This video is a very difficult one for me to do, not only because of the sensitivity of the subject, but also because I want to bring my actual heart on this topic across as well and as clear as I can. I don't want to make it easy for anything I say to be taken out of the context that I'm trying to establish it on. It's quite obvious that the internet is a platform that is built on outrage, hate, and trying to win debates or arguments at the expense of people. That being said, I really want to preface this video by saying one simple thing about me. I love people, and I believe at my core that human beings are beautiful, complex, and carry a lot of deep value. The foundation of my thinking around this video comes from this place of being intrinsically interested in helping people. This is actually a video that I've wanted to do since the day I started this channel, but I knew I needed a lot of wisdom in how I present my perspectives, so it took me quite a while to sit down and actually write this properly. But it's time. Today, I want to talk about what the word transphobia actually means. When looking at this word, I find there are way too many channels, communities, or even influencers that try to cover this topic, but they end up completely misrepresenting it. And the clearest example of that misrepresentation is the way people talk about JK Rowling. The way they talk about her stance on trans issues.
I need to talk about JK Rowling and the fact that yes, she is in fact transphobic.
JK Rowling sure has been busy lately, taking her transphobic spiral to unbelievable new lows.
This is some serious Voldemort villain.
For the influential author of children's literature to be so vehemently anti-trans and to so publicly shame, ridicule, and invalidate trans people is lethal.
Yeah, I mean, it's so tough to see someone that you idolize as a child, say something just so hurtful and damaging.
If she's saying that trans women aren't real women, then she's also saying trans men aren't real men. I don't know what's worse, feeling invalidated or feeling invisible.
If you look online, you can see there is obviously a massive split in how people view JK Rowling. On one side, you have people who genuinely believe that she is transphobic, and on the other, you have people who completely agree with her perspective and don't believe she's a transphobe at all. And obviously, you do have a lot of people who don't really know what their stance is on JK Rowling. So I wanted to understand why there is so much confusion, because there are objective definitions around words like transphobia that actually help us come to conclusions and find truth about people and these topics, to be able to definitely say whether someone is truly transphobic or not. So after seeing all the hate that JK Rowling has received over the years for her comments, her posts, and even criticisms around the trans ideology, I keep coming back to one simple question. Is JK Rowling actually transphobic? Up until this point, I understood the word transphobic to mean having or showing a dislike or prejudice against a transgender person. That is literally the definition of transphobia, both on Google and the official Oxford Dictionary. And the subject of that definition, and I really need to emphasize this because it is extremely important, is a dislike or a prejudice against a transgender person. A person who carries this identity. Now, I don't hate people for their personal choices, and I believe there is no evidence of JK Rowling hating people based on their personal decisions. I have nothing against individuals living the lives that they choose to live, but I am against certain ideas, ideologies, or values, and so is every other human on this planet. We all have beliefs, convictions, and biases, and most of us understand that we can absolutely criticize ideas. In fact, in order to progress as a human race, we should always have the freedoms to criticize ideas and worldviews, even religions, as long as we're not inciting hatred or violence towards people. Then I thought, okay, maybe JK Rowling actually crossed the line somewhere. Maybe that's the difference between her and me. Maybe she did actually attack an individual based on their beliefs. And maybe that's why the reaction is so extreme. So with that in mind, I went through all of JK Rowling's views and statements that she has been criticized for saying over the years, genuinely trying to find where is she attacking a trans person? Where is she inciting hatred towards someone for being transgender? And I couldn't find any evidence of this. At least not what I would consider to be actual evidence based on definition. But it seems that for a lot of people, what used to be clear and objective has now become subjective and completely open to interpretation. I spent so much time trying to find examples, but all I found were people passionately and unknowingly misrepresenting the definition of transphobia and then using that against her. Now I want to quickly interject that the word definition comes from the Latin word definire, which literally means to set clear boundaries or to mark the limits of something, in our case a word. That's the whole purpose of a definition, to give a word a fixed, precise meaning that everyone, and I mean everyone, can understand the same way. This is how words have always worked. So with that in mind, let's look at the biggest accusations of transphobia JK Rowling has faced over the years. The first big moment was when she supported Maya Forstater back in 2019. Maya lost her job for stating something as simple as a man cannot change into a woman, and for refusing to be forced to use preferred pronouns. Rowling then stood up for her. This opened the eyes to quite a lot of people who saw this as inciting hatred. And they then jumped on this and said, see, she's supporting someone with gender-critical views. But Rowling's whole point, and she says this quite openly, is that she's defending free speech and defending women's rights, not actually attacking trans people. Then you have the infamous "people who menstruate" tweet back in 2020. She shared an article titled "Creating a More Equal Post-COVID-19 World for People Who Menstruate." And she added, "People who menstruate. I'm sure there used to be a word for those people." People then criticized this, saying that she was mocking inclusive language which does harm to people, but she was simply pointing out something obvious, that the word woman shouldn't be erased in the name of political correctness. After that, Rowling posted her essay titled "Why I Speak About Sex and Gender Issues." And if you actually read it, not just the TikTok summaries or the hit pieces, she raised pretty important concerns about women's spaces, about the law, and about children transitioning. A lot of people called this view harmful, when for a lot of people this was just basic safeguarding and common sense. Then in 2024, she posted something on X that really set the internet on fire. There are no trans kids. No child is born in the wrong body. There are only adults like you prepared to sacrifice the health of minors. A lot of people really did attack her for this one, claiming that she was denying the existence of trans children, which leads them to self-harm and even suicide. But if you actually read what she is saying, it's clear that she's calling out the way adults project ideology onto confused minors, trying to separate the human from the idea. She's pointing out that kids aren't supposed to find their identity through an ideology built around sexual preferences or internal labels they don't understand yet. But here's the important part that nobody that ever criticizes her ever wants to even acknowledge. Rowling repeatedly says over and over again that she respects every trans person's right to live however feels authentic to them. She has never called for hatred, never called for violence, or never said that trans people shouldn't exist. Her issue has always been policy, law, safeguarding, and language, not people. And yet, because of the constant misrepresentation of the word transphobia, all of this gets flattened into one lazy accusation. She's transphobic. Not because she hates anyone, but because she disagrees with an ideology. So the real question is this: are these statements evidence of actual hatred towards trans people? Or are they just criticisms of ideas, policies, and language? Because if it's genuinely the second one, then the entire narrative around JK Rowling collapses. And honestly, I think that's why so many people are terrified to even ask the question. Now, I didn't find that this was enough. Because of the amount of hate that she's receiving, I wanted to try and see things from the perspective of those who actually hate her. So I decided to do a bit of a deep dive into the definition of transphobia using other sources. And that's when I discovered something genuinely fascinating, and honestly, a bit alarming, about how the word itself is in the middle of evolving away from its original meaning. The deeper I went through this, the more and more I started to understand what was going on around the word transphobia and what was actually happening around JK Rowling. I went to the official online Cambridge dictionary and discovered that they recently edited the definition and changed to the original wording from a fear or dislike of transgender people to harmful or unfair things a person does based on a fear or dislike of transgender and non-binary people. Looking into this, the phrase unfair things really stood out to me because that is such a broad, vague term. It's not based on any objective reality. It can literally be used to accuse someone of wrongdoing simply because of how something made you feel. Now, anyone who understands language knows that words naturally evolve over time. That's normal. But when a word shifts so far that it stops helping or protecting actual people and instead becomes a tool to defend an ideology at the expense of someone's safety or the right to an opinion, that's when we need to recognize that something has gone seriously wrong. And this is extremely dangerous, not only for people who want to express criticism against an ideology they disagree with, but also dangerous against individuals who, to their core, believe in this ideology and even live by it, and I'll explain what I mean by this later. So clearly the meaning of the word transphobia has now started to change in activist circles, online spaces, and even a lot of academic frameworks. The definition has now begun to stretch far beyond hatred towards a trans person. Suddenly, it's starting to include things like disagreeing with certain parts of gender ideology, questioning whether self-ID alone should replace biological sex in the law, acknowledging that biological sex exists and actually matters in this conversation, supporting women-only spaces based on sex, raising concerns about medical transitions for minors, or even just defending someone's right to talk openly about these things. And under this newer definition, you can now be labeled transphobic even if you don't hate trans people, don't fear trans people, don't mistreat trans people, and genuinely believe that trans adults deserve full dignity, compassion, and protection as individuals. Websites like transactual.org.uk, certain subreddits, and forums like Empty Closet are the ones pushing hard for this change in definition. Changing the meaning of the word transphobia, or any morally loaded word, is incredibly dangerous. And the reason is actually pretty simple. When you change the meaning of a word like this, you're no longer talking about harmful behavior towards actual people. You're now policing ideas and thought. The original meaning of transphobia was very clear: hatred or prejudice towards a transgender person. But once the word starts being used to describe disagreement with an ideology, a belief system, or even a policy, you're no longer protecting people. You're protecting an idea. And that's exactly what is happening now. I can't believe I have to say this, but ideas don't have rights. People have rights. The moment society starts treating criticism of an idea as if it's an attack on a person, honest conversation dies. You can't ask questions anymore, and you can't debate policies. You can't challenge bad actors or point out contradictions. And the second a word like transphobia gets weaponized to shut people up instead of protecting individuals, you create a culture of fear, where people stay silent not because they're hateful, but because they're terrified of being labeled as hateful. Me sitting down right now and making this video has been a very hard pill for me to swallow, because I know I'm going to be misrepresented and labeled as something that I personally detest, all because I have my own value system. And this is exactly why I find this modern use of the word so concerning. Because once a term stops being rooted in protecting people, it becomes a tool that can be used against anyone that steps outside the accepted narrative. Even if their intention is respectful, thoughtful, or completely harmless. It creates this environment where people are forced to choose between being silent or being branded with a label that carries enormous social weight, or at least used to carry. I can tell you right now that there absolutely are people watching this who are feeling nothing but hatred towards me, and maybe even a strong desire to see something bad happen to me, because they have been indoctrinated to the point that they equate me criticizing an idea to dehumanizing them as individuals. If there is anyone watching me who deeply believes that I am evil and what I am doing is a form of hatred, I just want to say that you as an individual are fearfully and wonderfully made by God, and I genuinely want what's best for you in this life, especially if you have transitioned or if you struggle deeply with gender dysphoria. One of the arguments trans activists often make, and I kind of understand where the emotion comes from, is that criticizing transgender ideology or choosing not to participate in it is a form of hatred and causes harm to trans people. And when you first hear that, it sounds pretty genuine, it sounds pretty serious, and it sounds like something that you should definitely take on board and take to heart. And honestly, if we were talking about the real, long-standing definition of transphobia, actual hatred, actual mockery, discrimination, or abuse towards a trans individual, I would completely agree. Hurting people is wrong. Nobody decent wants this. Everyone deserves to live without fear or cruelty. Even Jesus stood for this. But that's not what this argument is usually about. What's happened over the past few years is that the word harm has shifted. It's no longer being used to describe bigotry towards a person. Instead, it's being used to describe disagreement with a belief system that not everyone accepts. And instead of staying in the realm of, let me live how I choose, the expectation has become, you must affirm this, you must use this language, and you must speak this way even if you don't believe it. It means the boundary line has now moved from their world into yours. It's not really about safety anymore, it's about participation. And to support the shift, activists will often point to studies. These papers get presented as absolute proof that if someone doesn't truly affirm every part of gender ideology, they're somehow contributing to suffering or even suicide. But the way these studies get used in public conversations is almost never accurate. They take very real pain, things like trauma, depression, family rejection, and bullying, and boil it down to one overly simplified message. If you don't use my pronouns, you're hurting me and enabling me to harm myself. I don't believe this helps anyone. Not the trans people who are actually struggling, and not the people they're demanding this from. Because real compassion shouldn't require you to shut your brain off. And genuine care shouldn't depend on forcing others to repeat ideas they don't believe in. It is possible, and honestly it's necessary, to respect people while still being honest about where we disagree. And that brings me to something even deeper. Something I think is at the core of why all of this matters so much to me. Because when we start taking genuine concern, honest disagreements, or thoughtful questions and label it as hatred, it creates this illusion that tolerance is the highest form of love. Tolerance is nothing. It's just apathy. It's a performance of kindness that doesn't actually help anyone grow, heal, or understand themselves. It's pathetic. And it shows a huge lack of genuine care. A lot of people who have grown up, who unfortunately only faced tolerance as a form of love and acceptance, have a very false view on what love actually is. Real love means caring about a person enough to tell them the truth, especially when it's uncomfortable, or when it costs you something. Love requires sacrifice and honesty. It requires a willingness to encourage someone to accept themselves for who they are, not simply to tolerate a decision that could have a permanent impact on their life. I found out recently that my wife is pregnant with our first and we're having a daughter. Now, if I genuinely love my daughter, then in the future I would make sure that I help her make wise decisions with her life, as long as she's under my roof. For example, if in the future a guy starts pursuing my daughter and I find out he is just a predator out to mess around with her, real love would be me stepping in and stopping her from seeing him, despite how that makes her feel. Even if at the time it'll cost me a portion of my relationship with her. Because love protects no matter what. I will love her even when it costs me. Now this is the problem. This deep and complicated issue is far too often just simply brushed aside by the very people who claim to love those struggling with something as heavy as gender dysphoria. Instead of stepping into the mess and walking with them towards truth and healing, many choose the easier path, the cowardly path of tolerance. They stay silent, they nod along, and they affirm things that deep down they might actually believe are harmful or rooted in confusion, simply because it's socially safer to comply than to care. But like everything in life, there are exceptions. There actually are people who show real courage, who step into the difficult conversations, who actually love enough to risk discomfort, backlash, or being misunderstood. And my hope, genuinely, is to shape myself to become one of these people. To offer the kind of love that doesn't evaporate the moment it becomes inconvenient. And I personally admire JK Rowling for her stance on this. Imagine the level of confusion a young person is dealing with today. We're all taught from a young age that we need to accept ourselves for who we are. But how does that actually fit in with gender dysphoria? The moment a young person starts questioning their gender, it almost feels mandatory now for the voices around them to immediately say, maybe you were born in the wrong body. So suddenly accepting yourself isn't connected to your biological reality anymore. It's tied to a mental struggle or an idea. How do these young people then decide what to actually accept if you are born one way, but not allowed to use that in this conversation anymore? How are young people making these decisions without any foundation? And how is it that they are adults who are pushing to force this on children? Now, when you challenge this, people who support the modern transgender ideology will argue, well, it's not that simple. Gender has nothing to do with biological sex. Gender is just a social construct. So let's look at this then with moral consistency, because that matters. If you genuinely believe gender has nothing to do with biological sex, then to be morally consistent, you also have to believe that the social constructs around everything, including race and age, have nothing to do with biological reality. You can't say one biological reality doesn't matter and then turn around and say another one suddenly does. That's just picking and choosing. And here's where the analogy becomes important. If you think the social constructs around gender should be dismantled, then with the exact same logic, you'd have to believe that the social constructs around age, including the ones that protect children, are also just constructs that could be dismantled, which would imply, absurdly and dangerously, that something as evil as pedophilia is just a social construct that could be thrown out. Now, to be absolutely clear, I am not comparing suffering with gender dysphoria to something as evil as pedophilia. I'm just showing how the logic behind social constructs collapses when applied consistently. I don't believe any of these things are merely social constructs. As a Christian, I believe in absolute truth, and I believe part of loving people is helping them move towards truth, not drift further away from it, especially when the alternative is settling for surface level ideas, like pretending biological reality is nothing more than a social construct. Earlier I mentioned how the shift in the meaning of the word transphobia doesn't actually help transgender people. And there are two big reasons for this. First, it completely dilutes the power of the word when it is used against someone who genuinely fits the original definition. Someone who actually holds hatred or prejudice towards trans people. The word used to describe a very real, very serious kind of hatred. But when you apply it to absolutely everything, it loses all of its power. It becomes noise. And that means the people who really are hateful end up blending into the background because the label gets slapped on everyone.
And when everyone's transphobic, no one will be.
And second, and this is the part nobody wants to talk about, the shift has completely backfired. When you keep calling people transphobic just for questioning an idea, eventually people stop separating the ideology from the individual. The constant outrage, the constant shaming, the constant dehumanizing of anyone who doesn't fully agree, it pushes people so far away that they start resenting the entire conversation, including the people. The dehumanization and demonization of people who simply disagree with an ideology has been allowed to go on for far too long. When you treat normal, decent human beings as villains long enough, some of them eventually give up trying to be compassionate at all. They shut down. They get defensive, and a tiny portion of those people will actually become the very thing that they were falsely accused of. That's what happens when you call everyone a monster. Eventually, someone decides, fine, then I'll be the monster you say I am. This doesn't protect trans people. It doesn't create safety. It creates hostility, and it turns a deeply human issue, something that needs patience, love, and truth, into an ideological battlefield where everybody loses. And the saddest thing about all of this is that the people who suffer the most are those who genuinely struggle with gender dysphoria. Because instead of getting real support, real compassion, and real truth, they get caught in the crossfire of a culture war built on labels that no longer mean what they used to. And this is where all of this circles back to something far deeper than a debate about language or ideology. At the end of the day, this isn't really about a word, it's about people, it's about truth, and it's about what love actually is and what it absolutely isn't. Because after watching the shift happen for years, I've realized something heartbreaking. We've confused agreement with compassion. We've confused silence with kindness. And we've confused tolerance with love. Real love isn't passive. It isn't just nodding along so you don't offend anyone. It's not abandoning your own convictions because the world tells you it's easier to comply than to care. Real love means being willing to walk into uncomfortable conversations for the sake of another person's well-being. It means valuing someone enough to speak truth even when it costs you something. It means helping someone accept who they truly are, not just who they feel like in a painful season. So when you look at the shift in meaning, when simply thinking men don't belong in women's bathrooms, or men shouldn't compete in women's sports, or we shouldn't allow kids to transition, when these thoughts are now considered transphobic acts, then to answer the question in the title of this video, yes, JK Rowling is transphobic. And so is anyone who dares to believe in biological reality, or basic boundaries, or protecting children, or even just common sense. Because under this new definition, it doesn't matter if you love trans people. It doesn't matter if you want what's best for them. It doesn't matter if you support their right to live in peace and dignity. None of that counts anymore. All it takes is one disagreement with an ideology, not a person, and suddenly you've been rebranded as a bigot. Not because you hate anyone, but because you refuse to bow to an idea.